Hello, my name is Daniel Edwards, and this is an introduction to the Viola da Gamba for people with a general knowledge and interest in music, as part of my public performance and presentation module at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance. The viol, or viola da gamba, is an early type of stringed instrument, originating from the Renaissance period. Viols come in treble, tenor, and bass sizes, but they are all held vertically, like a cello, but are supported by the legs. Viola da gamba means literally viol for the legs, translated from the Italian. There are many people who make very fine instruments at the present time. This viol here is a bass viol, made in 1998 by Anthony West, and is approximately the same size as a cello. A treble viol is about the same size as a violin, and the tenor viol is somewhere between the two, though much bigger than a viola. The most obvious difference between the viol and the violin is that it has 6 strings, and sloping shoulders, and a flat back. The sides are much deeper, and the body is much larger in proportion, but the construction is much lighter, and is made of thinner wood. These qualities make the viol very resonant. It has 6 strings tuned in fourths, with a third between the middle 2. These strings are made of catgut, which is the dried and twisted intestines of sheep or horses, but never cats. This material has a beautiful tone, but the strings don't last very long before they break, and are very expensive. A full set of strings today costs about £100. A key difference between the viol and the violin family is that the viol has frets. Unlike a guitar, these frets are not made of metal and attached in a fixed position, but are made of catgut and tied on. In fact, these frets are usually old broken strings that have been recycled. Because they are only tied in place, they can be moved to adjust the tuning for playing in different keys and temperaments. Another misconception about the viol is that the frets make it easier to play in tune. The real purpose is to replicate the same sound as on an open string anywhere on the instrument. This works because the fret is a hard surface that doesn't stop the string vibrating, as the soft pad of a finger does on a violin. The bow is also very different. It has a more pronounced curve and is held underhand, with the fingers actually touching the hair, controlling the tension. For nearly 200 years, the viol was extremely popular all over Europe, but was mainly used by royalty, aristocrats and scholars, as they were very expensive. The middle classes would not have been able to afford to play the viol, not just because of the cost of buying one, which would exceed the annual wage of a craftsman, but their upkeep was also very costly. Spare strings were many times more expensive than they are even now, and sheet music was largely unobtainable for all but the very wealthy. In England, the viol was the second most popular instrument, after the lute. The record of the King's music of 1540, when Henry VIII was on the throne, lists 54 viols and lutes among the court's instrument collection. Although the violin originated as a peasant's instrument, it eventually superseded the violin, probably because the violin is louder, and the viol was neglected for hundreds of years, usually regarded as somewhat of a curiosity, until the early music revival began in the 20th century, which continues to this day. The viol has a very subdued and mellow sound, which blends perfectly with other viols. A group of viols is called a consort, and the homogeneous texture which they produce is very resonant and full of overtones, which are best heard in smaller rooms. Most English viol music is polyphonic and written for between 3 and 6 viols, of a range of sizes, where the parts are all of equal importance and beauty. Alfonso Ferrabosco, a composer born in Greenwich, London, but of Italian descent, wrote excellent music in this style. In France, viol music was mainly written for a bass viol, either unaccompanied or with harpsichord. It is the tuning of the viol, where the intervals are smaller than the violin's fifths, that allows it to play chords very easily, so in solo pieces the harmony is clear, and not just implied. The composer Marin Murray, who was a viola da gamba virtuoso himself, wrote many solo pieces for the bass viol. This excerpt, accompanied on the harpsichord, does not make use of double stopping, but is largely in the highest part of the viol's register, which is another feature of the solo repertoire. In Germany, the viol was used mostly in combination with other instruments in chamber music, sometimes referred to as broken consorts. J.S. Bach wrote obbligato viola da gamba solos in his Passions for orchestra and choir, exploiting both the melodic and chordal properties of the instrument. Although I mentioned earlier that the viol was neglected for centuries, one person who did take an interest in Renaissance instruments was the author Thomas Hardy. He was a man who had a fondness for the archaic, and many of his novels and poems mention the viol. Indeed, the plot of his first novel, Under the Greenwood Tree, is centered on the role of the viol and string players in the community's church services. I will now read Hardy's poem, The House of Hospitalities, which is on the theme of regret at the passing of happiness from younger days, and references the viol to capture this in a quaint and charming way. The House of Hospitalities. Here we broached the Christmas barrel, pushed up the charred log end. Here we sang the Christmas carol, and called in friends. Time has tired me since we met here, when the folk now dead were young, since the vines were set out here, and quaint songs sung. And the worm has bored the viol that used to lead the tune. Rust has eaten out the dial that struck night's noon. Now no Christmas brings in neighbours, and the new year comes unlit. Where we sang, the mole now labours, and spiders knit. Yet at midnight, if here walking, when the moon sheets wall and tree, I see forms of old time talking, who smile on me. I think Thomas Hardy would have been excited that more and more people are playing the viol again.